I was on my way back home after visiting a friend, and the night was deep. I can't recall the exact time, but if I had to guess, it was likely around 2 or 3 in the morning. My place was about 20 minutes away, not too distant, especially since the area was sparsely populated. The heavy rain and absence of streetlights made visibility poor, so I drove cautiously and at a slower pace. About 5 minutes into the drive, I reached a traffic light. I had a red light, but on the opposite side, a blue car was partially stopped in the intersection. Its headlights were on, yet it remained motionless despite having a green light. I wondered if something was wrong. Maybe the driver had fallen asleep, but when the light changed, I carefully drove around them. As I passed, I tried to peek into their car, but the rain streaking my window obscured my view. A short while later, I noticed the blue car had turned and was now trailing behind me, so it clearly wasn't disabled. I kept glancing at my mirrors. I'm not usually paranoid, but the situation felt unnervingly deliberate. A minute later, the car's headlights grew brighter in my mirrors as it closed the gap, now just a few feet from my bumper. In such weather, this aggressive tailgating made me extremely uneasy. I refocused on the road, but then a small warning light appeared on my dashboard. It indicated low tire pressure, a routine alert, but its timing felt suspicious given the circumstances. I checked my mirrors again. The car was still there, its headlights nearly blinding me. I was only 4 or 5 minutes from home, approaching my neighborhood, when my dashboard flashed a new warning: flat tire. My heart sank. The moment I saw that, everything clicked, and I was almost certain the car behind me was responsible. I drove a bit farther, hoping to get closer to home, but I could feel my car tilting to the left, the rim grinding against the road. I had no choice but to pull over. The car behind me stopped as well. I should have called for help immediately, but I was too fixated on the people in the other car to think clearly. Even if I had called, it likely wouldn't have changed what came next. After I parked, 3 doors opened and 3 men stepped out. I had only seconds to react, but I was completely unprepared and vulnerable. They rushed toward my car, 2 on my side and 1 on the passenger side. One man approached my window, shouting at me to open the door while pointing a gun at me. Everything happened so quickly that I was in a daze. I began to reach for the door, but the man at the back smashed something against the window, shattering it, and unlocked the door from the inside. They were yelling, at me and at each other as chaos erupted. The man in the back leaned over, opening the other rear door, then reached forward to unlock my door. I sat frozen, hands raised to show I wasn't a threat. I knew there was no escaping this, even if I'd been armed. Once my door was open, the man with the gun yanked me out and threw me onto the ground. Strangely, as I lay there on the wet pavement, all I could think about was how cold and soaked it felt. Not the gun pressed to my head, or the fact that I was being robbed and assaulted. I think my mind was trying to detach from the trauma of the moment. I wasn't on the ground for long before one of the men shouted, and the one holding me struck the back of my head, slamming my face into the pavement. I wasn't sure if he used the gun or his fist. I was too numb to tell. Somehow it didn't knock me out. I heard their car doors shut, and then they sped away. I rolled over, still dazed, and struggled to get up. They'd taken my phone, so I had no choice but to drive my damaged car home and call the police from there, further ruining my rims in the process. The investigation led nowhere, concluding only that the suspects had placed small tire spikes at the intersection where I first saw them. I was lucky to have hit only 1 spike, minimizing the damage. Their plan was likely to ambush me as soon as I fell into their trap, but in the end, it didn't matter. They got what they wanted. I'm 24 years old, and until 3 months ago, I lived alone with my dog, Bear, in a comfortable townhome. I moved in when I was 22, thanks to a stable job that allowed me to afford it. I adored the place. It was my first rental, and it felt like a milestone. But 2 years of peaceful living were shattered one night. The weather was dreary, with heavy rain pouring down. It was my day off, so I was lounging in my living room chair, scrolling through my phone. It was around 8 p.m., just an hour before my usual bedtime. Bear had been sitting by the back door for a while, staring outside. Suddenly he started whining and ran over to me, his way of telling me he needed to go out. I got up, let him out, closed the door, and stood in the kitchen. Though it was just a townhome, there was a small fence separating the backyards, so I didn't worry about Bear wandering off. I should mention that Bear isn't a big dog. He's small and fluffy, like a teddy bear. About 15 or 20 seconds after I let him out, I heard him whimper and bark. His bark sounded scared, like he was running away from something. It startled me, and I rushed to the door, seeing Bear sprinting back to me with his tail tucked between his legs. Once he was inside, I leaned out and scanned the backyard, expecting to see a coyote or something by the fence, but there was nothing. I checked Bear to make sure he was okay, then locked the door. He never acted like that, so it really worried me. I let him sit on my lap for the rest of the evening. Over the next 30 minutes, he kept lifting his head and staring at different windows and doors. Then, after about 45 minutes, Bear turned his head and growled at the window behind me, his ears flattened. "Bear," I said, turning to look, and there, just a few feet away, was a man staring right at me through the window. He was pressed almost against the glass. I screamed and jumped back, and the man immediately bolted down the side of the house. Bear started barking loudly from the sudden commotion. I quickly closed the blinds and checked all the others, making sure they were shut tight. From the brief glimpse I got, I didn't recognize the man. I had no idea who he was, why he was there, or why he was staring at me. I tried to listen for any signs he was still around, but the rain outside drowned out any other noises. Bear seemed calmer, though, so I stayed up a bit longer to be safe, then took him upstairs to sleep in my room. It took me a long time to fall asleep, my mind racing with thoughts. But eventually, after about an hour, I drifted off. When I woke up, Bear was standing by the bedroom door, staring at it intently. It was unsettling to wake up to that, but seconds later, I heard a man's voice downstairs. Then, another man responded from the other side of the house. Their footsteps were loud, and they weren't even whispering. It was like they didn't care if I knew they were inside. My bedroom door was locked, but I had nowhere else to go. I quietly went over to Bear, trying to keep him calm, then picked him up and hid in the corner of the room behind the bed. It took me a moment to realize that everything had gone silent. No footsteps, no voices. That's when I grabbed my phone and called the police, whispering as softly as I could. As I gave them my address, Bear started growling low, then barked and whined as 2 sets of footsteps began climbing the stairs. I begged the operator to send help immediately. The 2 men started talking again, but their words were muffled. "Hey, we just want to talk. We're not here to hurt you," one of them said. I screamed back, telling them I'd called the cops and to leave me alone. I was panicking, unsure of what to do. There was a pause. Then one of them said, "We're here to help you." I didn't respond, too busy trying to stifle my crying. "Open the door," he said. Everything went quiet again. I could only hear their breathing outside the door for what felt like an eternity before one of them walked back downstairs. I wasn't sure if they'd left or were still downstairs, but I only heard one set of footsteps leaving the door. It was eerily quiet, and I couldn't hear any breathing anymore. In the distance, the faint sound of sirens began to grow louder. A sense of relief started to wash over me. As the sirens got closer, I heard footsteps running out of the house downstairs, but I still had no idea where the other man was. It seemed unlikely he was still by my door, but I never heard him leave. I waited for the police to arrive and enter the house. I heard them searching downstairs, then slowly making their way upstairs and knocking on my door. I hesitated to open it, still convinced the other man might be nearby. When I finally did, it was just an officer. I immediately explained my concerns. He guided me out of the house while his partner continued searching, but no one else was found. The only evidence they found was wet footprints around the house and an unlocked window. I wasn't even sure if I'd left it unlocked. It terrified me, feeling so certain the other man was still there, yet finding no trace of him. The experience made it impossible to sleep at night, always feeling like someone was watching me. I moved out 3 months ago. The stress of not knowing what happened or who those men were was too much to bear. To this day, neither of them has been identified or arrested, and their intentions remain a mystery. Even now, living miles away in a new apartment, I sometimes still feel like I'm not alone. I work at a small convenience store located on the corner of a quiet shopping street. It's essentially a local version of a 7-Eleven. For a while, I worked morning shifts that started at 3 a.m. and ended at 1 p.m. I agreed to these shifts because they were always the slowest and required minimal effort. My tasks included helping customers, restocking shelves, and taking out the trash, which meant I often had little to do. This incident happened in the middle of winter, but since I live in a warmer state, it usually rains instead of snowing. It was drizzling outside, enough to keep most people indoors. On quiet mornings like this, I like to step outside, lean against the front of the building, and smoke to pass the time. I wasn't supposed to, but there was no one around to stop me. The shopping strip had about 8 or 9 other stores connected to ours. All of them operated during normal hours, so none opened before 6 or 7 a.m. When I saw a car pull into the parking lot while I was smoking, I naturally assumed they were coming to the convenience store. I put out my cigarette, tossed it in the trash, and went back inside, waiting behind the counter. With nothing else to do, I waited for the customer to come in and leave so I could return to my boredom. After a few minutes, with no one entering, I walked back to the door and checked outside. The car was still there, parked nearby, but the headlights were off, and it seemed empty. It was still drizzling, and all the other stores were closed, so I was confused about where the driver had gone. I took one last look around, saw no one, and went back inside. Another 30 minutes passed with nothing happening, and I think I just stood behind the counter zoning out. I checked the time and realized I'd only been at work for a little over an hour. I decided to check the trash cans and take out the garbage. I went around the store, collecting the trash bags, replacing them with new ones, and loading them onto a cart. As I did this, I heard a faint click from outside. It sounded like something snapping or breaking, but with the rain hitting the roof and the sound being distant, I couldn't tell what it was or where it came from. At the time, I barely thought about it. It just seemed like another random noise from the old building. Once I loaded all the trash bags onto the cart, I wheeled it into the back room and unlocked the door leading to the dumpster. I sighed, seeing the rain had picked up, right when I needed to go outside. Regardless, I pushed the cart through the rain to the dumpster, which was directly across from the door. After tossing in the trash, I turned back toward the door but noticed something unusual. The store next to mine had its door wedged open. I'd never seen anyone there before 6 a.m., so it made me curious. I went back inside to get out of the rain and checked the front door to see if the neighboring store's door was open. All the lights were off, and it looked locked and empty, as usual for that time. After thinking for a few minutes, I decided I had nothing better to do and went back outside to investigate. I walked up to the open door near the dumpster. The lights were still off, and it seemed to lead into a small closet-like room, with another door likely leading to the main store area. I stepped inside, standing in the doorway to avoid looking like I was sneaking in. From there, I could hear someone moving around in the other room, walking, opening drawers, and making a mess. This made me even more suspicious. "Hey, is everything okay in there?" I called out, hoping for a reassuring response from a store employee. The noise stopped. I waited a few seconds, realizing this wasn't normal and something was definitely wrong. I stepped back outside into the rain. As I hurried back to my store, I noticed something was missing from the door I had just left. It took me a moment to figure it out, but then I saw there was no handle, just an empty hole where it should have been. Looking down, I realized the wedge holding the door open was actually the broken door handle. I ran back into my store, locked all the doors, and called 911 as well as my store manager. Once I knew help was on the way, I pressed my ear against the wall connecting our stores, listening to what sounded like a robbery. Whoever was inside must have realized I'd called the police, because they started moving quickly, running around and knocking things over. After about 30 seconds to a minute, I saw flashing lights outside and heard sirens approaching the back of the building. The footsteps rushed to the back of the store, followed by loud yelling, which I assumed was the officers. After a minute, I checked the back door and saw the scene had calmed down. I walked out to talk to the officers. I thanked them for arriving so quickly and gave them a statement. The man they arrested was found with a pillowcase containing nearly $6,000 worth of stolen items. He also had an unloaded firearm and various tools for breaking doors and locks. Unbeknownst to me, he had also broken into the store 2 spots down. It's unclear if the man knew I was working at the time, but since my store lights were on, it's unlikely he would have targeted my store. However, several large scratches were found on the back of our door handle, possibly from a previous attempt.